In the midst of soaring inflation, Zimbabwe has been given a fresh lifeline to help pay off part of its debt. And inflation continues to dominate global economic discussions and even those on the continent. Amid the highest inflation figures in years, Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee will meet to discuss what direction to take. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Let's start with the African business headlines. Egypt's Bank Dukare has postponed the listing of its shares on the Egyptian exchange to present market conditions, and that's because of insufficient liquidity and low trading prices, as it was expected to be listed before the end of the year. The bank had finished several restructuring-related tasks before the offering, including acquiring Bank Misri's whole share holding in a deal worth 7 billion Egyptian pounds in collaboration with the offering manager AfDB Hermes. Following what is thought to be a covert deal between the Nigerian government and oil marketers, premium motor spirits, more commonly known as petrol, will likely be sold between 170 naira to 190 naira per litre in filling stations across the nation. The meeting between the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority and oil marketers last week appears to be the catalyst for the development. There has been no official statement from Nigeria's government on this latest news. Vice President Mahamudu Bawumia has stated that the government is aiming to establish a credit system in Ghana with credit scoring provided by credit reference agencies. It is expected that important pillars like the Ghana card would give the holder a distinct identity and vital details about them, such as their bank accounts, SIM card, and more. The Vice President added that essential steps have already been taken to enable credit scoring and that the borrower would also have a clear location thanks to the National Digital Property Address System. In the most recent auction, the Kenyan commodity markets have seen mixed results, with tea prices slightly declining while coffee prices increased for a second straight auction. According to Nairobi Coffee Exchange data, the cost of the beverage went from $265, around 31,270 Kenyan shillings, to $267, that's 31,506 Kenyan shillings, for a 50-kilogram bag. The auction began last week after a one-month break, and this is the second time prices have increased since then. You're watching Business Edge, and right after these headlines, we're taking a quick time out now. When we come back, it's on to our first conversation. Do stay with us. With $13.5 billion of external debt, Zimbabwe has been suffering from a debt overhang it can scarcely afford. Now, there does seem to be light at the end of the tunnel. The African Development Bank has agreed to help Zimbabwe begin the process of clearing this debt. While visiting Zimbabwe, the AfDB's president, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, said it was necessary to create a new hope and a new pathway to improve the country's future. About 40% of Zimbabwe's population lives in extreme poverty, and the country will struggle to lift them to wealth if it continues to bear this heavy burden. So far, Zimbabwe has been able to make token payments to its creditors, which include the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, and all 17 Paris Club partners. The payoff agreed with the AfDB is a move which gives some way to signaling the country's commitment to international re-engagement. If it is successful, it could create a new growth trajectory for Zimbabwe's struggling economy. The African Development Bank's specialized technical assistance on debt management has helped clear debt arrears in Somalia and Sudan. Joining me from Harare, Zimbabwe, is Christopher Mugaga. He is the CEO of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. Christopher, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. How are you?
All right, and it's still morning here, but a good afternoon to you. So let's take a look at this conversation from this point. So Zimbabwe's external debt has increased rapidly recently, climbing from about 25.7% of the GDP in 2018 to 64.2% of the GDP in 2021. Why did we see such a significant and rapid climb in the country's debt, as well as how that debt has come about? What is it being used for?
Well, indeed, if you look closely, you realize that there has been a very significant growth in both the extent and the domestic debt position in Zimbabwe. But the debt position, which has ballooned of late, can be attributed to accruals more than the principal amount which Zimbabwe owes with the creditors, who includes the Bretton Woods institutions, in particular the World Bank. I'm sure you are aware that Zimbabwe does not owe International Monetary Fund anything at the moment, but rather African Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and a number of institutions where we have been ordering the debt on a pari passu kind of condition. But generally, the bigger picture is the debt ballooning has been more due to arrears accumulation more than the principal debt itself growing.
Okay, so following up with that, some economists say that the post-Mugabe government has been reckless and a bit careless with spending. And so even with the AfDB's help, it will not be able to clear the debt arrears. So after all, it is difficult to clear old debts if you keep increasing it on the side. What do you think about this?
I think the debate on debt clearance on Zimbabwe is quite very exciting, but at the same time, you don't have a one-size-fits-all model to deal with the debt situation itself. I think the best way, if you want to ask me what would be the much easier way to deal with the debt at the moment, is maybe if debt forgiveness could be key. But to seek debt forgiveness for a country which is marching towards an upper middle income economy might be difficult. I think you appreciate for debt forgiveness to take place. If you look at countries like Somalia, Eritrea, and a number of countries in Africa, you will see debt forgiveness normally comes alongside the classification of a country as a heavily indebted poor country. That is a HIPIC status as it is known in the economic cycle. But with Zimbabwe, at the moment, where we know that even in terms of income category, Zimbabwe is rated way even above neighboring countries like Malawi, like Zambia. That alone would then make the whole situation of debt clearing a bit difficult, because for IMF, for World Bank, and all these institutions to take a position on the debt situation in Zimbabwe, firstly, the discussion will be centered on the classification of the country itself, of which Zimbabwe's classification vis-a-vis the debt position is presenting a conundrum. It's not something you can easily label and come up with an easy conclusion. But given the status of Zimbabwe's economy, fragile fiscal status, unstable monetary status at the moment, certainly I think Adesina and his colleagues within the international community should look at ways to somehow over push for Zimbabwe even to access lines of credit in order to deal with the debt details. Because at the moment you will see the capacity to honor that debt is certainly quite not easy for Zimbabwe to achieve.
And you know, as you talked about that, a lot of this is about the accumulation of debt over some times. There are some historic issues that we must take into consideration for Zimbabwe. And one of Zimbabwe's major dollar expenses is its commitment to the global compensation deed, which should see white farmers who were evicted in 2000 receive a total of $3.5 billion in compensation. Now, Zimbabwe has repeatedly defaulted on these payments. How important do you think the resolution of this decades-long dispute is to Zimbabwe's progress, particularly economically?
Yeah, of course. Your question is very, very valid. If you look at the Chamber of Commerce position in Zimbabwe regarding the global compensation agreement issue, despite the fact that it's a constitutional issue, which Zimbabwe constitution, which was promulgated in 2018, recognizes the need to compensate those who have lost in the whole land reform. But Zimbabwe at this juncture is not ready to honor the $3.5 billion as it is put across in most of the platforms that you hear at the moment. If you look like I rated, or like I really said before, you see that Zimbabwe's debt position at the moment is so precarious to the extent that the debt to GDP level is pushing Zimbabwe to a position where you can say technically we are in a debt trap which we cannot easily get into. So committing $3.5 billion towards compensating the former farmers and trying to pay that amount at this moment, it can only be a recipe for disaster. It's suicidal because at the moment, like I referred to before also, Zimbabwe's fiscal position is very fragile, worsened by the current instability, which, once exchange rate dynamics are factored in, then you can see technically Zimbabwe is not strong enough to be able to deal with this whole 3.5 billion compensation agreement, which it has committed.
So let's stay on historic issues, because in March, Zimbabwe's Minister of Finance said the country is still reeling from the sanctions placed on it by the United States some 22 years ago, which of course has to do with this compensation issue and more, but that there isn't much that can be done when the country remains yoked and under these sanctions. So to what extent would you say Zimbabwe's current economic problems are as a result of these sanctions, are tied to the sanctions that it's facing right now?
Yeah, I think the whole role of sanctions on an economy like Zimbabwe, you really can't overemphasize them. If you look at the relationship today between Harare and Brussels, Harare and Washington, Harare and Houston, I think it's all and sundry clear to see that the trade relations are impacting definitely on capacity to access new lines of credit. As you are aware that the Bretton Woods institutions, where the major shareholders, Washington and Brussels, have very bad relations right now with Harare. So for you to expect Harare to access lines of credit, I think is asking for too much. So no one in his or her right thinking status can doubt the negative impact the economic sanctions is having. It's not sanctions which are targeted. The sanctions are felt within the banking sector, they are felt within the private sector, because even most of the players, members of the Chamber of Commerce in Zimbabwe, they cannot easily access lines of credit. If they are to access lines of credit, they have to access at your various interest rates, because the sovereign risk, the political risk, as it is called, the perception risk. So if you factor in all those kind of downside risks, you will realize that the sanctions are there in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe, unfairly for the past 5-8 years, has not been treated the same way we expect other countries to be treated. In fact, if you were to follow most of the countries in the region, you'll see with countries which are defaulted on paying debt, but they still receive support from the institutions of lending, unlike Zimbabwe, which has been working alone for the past almost a decade, you can say.
All right, Christopher, hold the line. We're going to take a break. The AfDB has promised Zimbabwe its specialized technical assistance in debt management, and we've seen the bank do this with Somalia and Sudan. So the next question is going to be, do you think it will be successful? And we'll be hearing from the president of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akimumi, after this break. Do stay with us. The success of the African Development Bank's technical assistance to Zimbabwe will depend on several factors, but the bank seems sure that not only can it help the country out of its debt situation, it can also help put the country on the right path. Still with me is Christopher Mugaga. He is the CEO of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. Now, Christopher, before we go further, I want us to hear from the president of the AfDB on this particular deal. So let's listen to this.
Zimbabwe has continued, despite the economic challenges it faces, to be a very reliable shareholder of the bank. Zimbabwe paid $9.8 and $9.6 million of its general capital increase for the 6th general capital increase of the bank. The 7th general capital increase as well. Zimbabwe is on track, and Zimbabwe has continued to make the token payments of roughly $700,000 a year to salvage some of the outstanding debt to us and to the World Bank and to others. And the third is the fact that I really believe that it's time to also reinvigorate, to redynamize the economy here, because it's critical for the Southern Africa development community. The fourth reason is that we are now talking of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And of course, Zimbabwe needs to play a very big role within that particular area, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in terms of human capital, or whether it's in terms of ICT and all of that. We want Zimbabwe to be a very key player for that. But finally, as I told Mr. President, it's the people of Zimbabwe. They've suffered long enough, 2 decades, and that's a lot of, I look at the situation today, you have 40% of the people in extreme poverty. And that will have to change and create a new hope.
So that's the president of the African Development Bank there speaking about why the bank seems to be getting involved with Zimbabwe's debt. So, Christopher, when you hear what he says, and what other thing that stood out to me is that the country has been paying about 700,000 towards its debt to not just the AfDB but the World Bank as well. $700,000 a year in terms of the astronomical debt that Zimbabwe holds. So let's start with this. The bank is involved now after Sudan and Somalia. Why is Zimbabwe looking like a priority for the African Development Bank?
Yeah, I mean, look, the issue is neither here nor there. But if you look closely, I mean, look, let's be honest. The African Development Bank can only play a role to a certain extent, but it doesn't have certainly the power even to clear the debt for Zimbabwe. I mean, there's a lot involved. There are shareholders within African Development Bank. So I don't personally, if I look at the issue of debt situation in most countries, Zimbabwe included, you have to understand it in the context of political economy, more than just to look at it from a technical angle. I think you have referred to some of the countries, some of them at one point considered failed state, but now it's the economy which are on the recovery. If you look at such facts alone, I think you understand the dynamic of debt forgiveness do not lie even with Adesina and this team at the AfDB. It's quite a bigger picture. The shareholders in AfDB, they included in the Western countries who own a bigger chunk than even some African states.
So this is the second or third time you've mentioned this issue of debt forgiveness, and we know that it's a larger conversation. We heard South African President Cyril Ramaphosa talking about it shortly coming out of COVID as well. When you look at Zimbabwe, when you look at the conversations happening in Zambia as well, when you look at what happened with Sudan, should we be seeing the African continent push more towards debt forgiveness for some of these debts rather than some of the piecemeal sort of conversations and negotiations we've been seeing going on, and even some help the way that the AfDB is extending to Zimbabwe now?
No. Maybe let me overemphasize what I'm raising, my sister. I am saying, if you look at the decision making regarding debt management within the region, it's more of a political economy. In other words, if you look at the shareholding structure for the banks of AfDB and even other banks, you will see who is calling the shots. Once you understand the dynamics on shareholder or structure of the bank, you will see you don't look at things on the surface and just say debt forgiveness will come overnight. It will definitely come with a tranche of conditionalities, some of them which are way beyond even the administration, who are supposed to be assisted by such, such banks. So you really don't look at a bank like AfDB Bank and expect to take a position on debt forgiveness or dealing with the debt of a country without consulting Washington and Brussels, who happens to be definitely the major shareholder.
All right. So, as I said earlier, Somalia, Sudan, the AfDB stepped in there. Do you think this could be the third home run for the African Development Bank in terms of making a success out of this technical assistance they are extending to Zimbabwe? Do we need to look at this in terms of the short, medium, and long term? And can it help the country reorient itself around this debt conversation?
Yeah, I think you can look at it from different angles. If you look at the Somalia, Sudan situation vis-a-vis Zimbabwe, obviously, I think you appreciate the stance Harare is taking of trying to compensate farmers. The very reason why Zimbabwe is worried and needs to push for the compensation of farmers, it knows that's the only way it can send a signal to Washington, D.C., to Brussels, of its commitment to re-engage the international community. Not only commitment to pay the debt, because after a while, I think you understand and you agree with me that for you to access new lines of credit, it's not necessarily the ability for you to honor your debt, which will be a condition. It's a political position or decision which has to be made. And the decision Zimbabwe is taking is conscious of what it requires. So the whole talk, the whole debate on debt forgiveness or technical assistance is neither here nor there. For your own information, one of the very banks right now which is so involved in Zimbabwe is the International Monetary. It has been offering technical assistance for the past decade. I'm sure you know about the staff monitoring program. The staff monitoring program being an informal kind of mechanism to help Zimbabwe deal with its economy, to extricate itself out of the debt mix, out of the fiscal can I say, age where it has been existing for years. So technical assistance has been coming from all angles. But the decision then to lend it or take it beyond technical is what has been lacking in terms of assisting Zimbabwe as a country.
All right, Christopher, we know that in Zimbabwe today there's high inflation, 192%. Food costs have more than tripled. There is a rapidly devaluing local currency, around 90% unemployment, and of course, unfortunately, declining manufacturing output. Tough measures are required. So whether it's the AfDB standing in to help clear these arrears or there's debt forgiveness, there are years and years of issues and mistakes that need to be corrected. What do you think are possibly the top 3 tough decisions, tough measures that the government of Zimbabwe needs to take right now?
Well, I think the best decision Zimbabwe has to make is to sell Zimbabwe as an investment destination, because perception is the reality. For someone who has never been to Zimbabwe, obviously the perception is quite very gray. It's not attractive, which means even those financiers, if they are considering Zimbabwe, it's not yet an attractive destination, not only for investment, but even for debt capital. So the investment in creating a positive story about Zimbabwe is the first thing which Zimbabwe needs to do before doing anything else. Secondly, I think we need to strengthen our institutions. Zimbabwe is one of the few countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, where you see a central government is running an overdraft with a central bank in the country. So you see some of the very reasons we are having the duty. You talk about inflation, you can talk of the exchange rate instability. Some of the very reasons why you see the challenges we are having is because of a same scenario where a government will get a beeline to a central bank to be bailed out if it fails to commit to its requirement or commit to its expenditure. And that has to be solved as soon as possible. And third, but not last, it could be last but not the least rather, Zimbabwe needs to invest in making sure it creates fiscal discipline. I think you appreciate, if you look at the budget deficit to GDP for Zimbabwe for years and coming back to now, where Zimbabwe has improved a lot, the problem with having a budget surplus like Zimbabwe is having at the moment, when the propensity to import remains high, is it has to be supported by the presence of the foreign currency. But the problem Zimbabwe has at the moment is the foreign currency pricing. It seems to be learning one of the 2 things from Nigeria. I think you know for years how the Abuja government, the challenges with an exchange rate where you go to Nigeria, an exchange rate to go to school in somewhere in Europe, an exchange rate to go to a religious event, maybe in Israel, an exchange rate for you to be privileged as a politician in Nigeria. If Zimbabwe seems to have copied that in all its entirety, which is wrong. So we need a way of dealing with exchange rate, where exchange rate determination needs to be respecting the market dynamics. And once that happens, I tell you, Zimbabwe will be in an age coming in.
All right, and I think that's really the good note to end on, because all is not completely lost. But as you said, if Zimbabwe can do 1, 2, 3, as you've mentioned, that the country can definitely put itself back on the path to sustainability and progress. Christopher Mugaga, CEO of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, thank you for joining me on Business Edge. And while we started this conversation looking at inflation and, of course, the economic situation in Zimbabwe, it's not the only country that's trying to deal with its inflation issues. We will be in West Africa, in the largest economy on the continent, after the break. But right before that, Lekan Onabanjo will be giving you international business news. Do stay with us.
A pleasant Monday morning to you. Welcome to International Business News. My name is Lekan Onabanjo. And we start off in Malaysia. The central bank there is giving foreign insurers until the end of the year 2023 to either reduce stakes in their local ventures or contribute to a charitable fund. People with knowledge of the matter said more than a decade after the requirement was introduced, foreign insurers that do not comply with the ownership limit by the deadline will have to pay into a national health insurance program known as B40 Health Protection Fund. The dollar began the week nudging down from multi-year highs with a hotter than forecast inflation reading in New Zealand, lending modest support to the Kiwi, though fears about Europe's gas supply put a cap on dollar selling. The greenback has soared this year thanks to a combination of rising U.S. interest rates and wobbling economies in Europe and China. It pushed above parity on the euro for the first time in almost 20 years last week before easing back. A looming ban on Russian coal imports by the European Union will add to supply pressure that has sent prices of fossil fuel hurtling to a record. Whitehaven Coal says global supply constraints and strong demand pushed Asia's benchmark Newcastle thermal coal to a quarterly record of $377 a ton in the 3 months through June. The company expects to report a jump in earnings to $3 billion Australian dollars, that's about $2 billion from 204.5 million Australian dollars when it next month reports financial year results. Now, India's slow monsoon season has delayed rice sowing, but farmers will be ramping up planting in the coming months, which will likely ease concern about a potential ban on exports. The area planted by the top rice exporter has shrunk by 17% this monsoon season through mid-July compared to a year ago. Lekan Onabanjo, Secretary of the Department of Agricultural Research and Education, said this is due to delayed rains in some eastern growing areas. The International Monetary Fund's UK head has warned Conservative Party rivals against promising tax cuts as part of their leadership bids amid soaring inflation. Mark Flanagan said debt-financed tax cuts at the current time would be a mistake. The IMF's top official said, if anything, the tax ration needs to be lifted. He said that tax cuts may even boost inflation by strengthening spending. Cutting taxes has been a key issue for the number 10 hopefuls, with candidates clashing over it on Sunday night in the latest televised debate. And that's about it on international business news. Now, Nigeria's latest inflation figures reached 18.6% for June as the country's Monetary Policy Committee prepares for its latest meeting. And that will be our next conversation. Do stay with us.
Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee will begin its 286th meeting today. At the top of its deliberations will be the matter of inflation. Nigeria's inflation rate hit 18.6% in June. Now, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, the rise in inflation was caused by an increase in the prices of food items like bread, cereals, meat, fish, and oil. Food inflation rose to 20.6% in June from 19.5% in May. Joining me to look at this now is Muktar Mohammed. He's the CEO of Astra Dynamic Solutions and, of course, a friend of Business Edge. Muktar, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
A pleasure to do.
So we saw that in May, the Nigerian Monetary Policy Committee chose to raise the baseline interest rate to some 13% to establish some kind of control over inflation. But now inflation stands at 18.6% this June, the highest level in 5.5 years. So do you think that the committee's last rate hike had any effect whatsoever, or was it a situation that inflation would have been much higher if that rate hike had not come into being?
I think it has no effect because what they were trying to achieve, they couldn't achieve it. They were only trying to see how they can attract foreign investment into Nigeria, especially from the fixed income space. That will help them also be able to stabilize the currency, especially the volatility of the Naira exchange rate to the dollar. Because when they are able to address that, they feel that they will be able to address the inflation shortfall. But unfortunately, the foreign investors did not come because they try to do that by making sure that the import-export window has a hike, even a tactical tactical way by moving the Naira to 425, 420. Devaluation, a tactical devaluation of the currency, but it didn't work. So definitely they know the main challenge that we've seen this inflation rate keep coming up is because we've not been able to address the exchange rate volatility, knowing that about 80% of what we eat comes from foreign countries. And like you pointed it out there in your report about the inflationary figure, when you look at the household item like cereal and milk, all these are not things that we produce in this country. And even when we produce it, some of those machineries that we use for this production are being imported from outside the shore of the country. And when you look at the food item, you know that the security challenges also have not helped issues. So definitely, the rate has not in any way affected the inflationary figure. You could even say it might have helped in hiking the inflation figures to where it is now.
So on that point right there, this is an issue, inflation in Nigeria right now, that predates COVID-19. It predates the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And we've been above the CBN's target band in terms of inflation for the past 7 years. So it's more than just a situation of now. This is something you could have predicted would get to this point, given any major global economic conflict like we've seen the Russia and Ukraine crisis bring about. So in terms of bringing it under control, monetary policy, is the CBN really limited in what it can do? Is there any out-of-the-box thinking that we should be looking for?
I think the CBN have done the best they can. I think they are the one that have helped. Maybe would have been doing 25% to 30% like other African nations are doing, if not for the CBN innovation in trying to go into areas that is not their jurisdiction. Because what we're saying is that monetary policy is being trying to stabilize trying to stabilize the economy, but the physical side is doing nothing, virtually nothing. There's no fiscal policy that's helped the monetary policy, and that is why you see the CBN also is beginning to intervene in the wheat production. The CBN is trying to do in Texas. The CBN is going into rice milling. Also, all these are not jurisdiction of the CBN. But because the CBN knows that if you don't have synergy between the monetary and the fiscal policy, then you will not see the results. So they are trying to see maybe we can get those results, and they can tell you, oh, we've been able to achieve that result in rice production, which is neither here nor there, but at least they've been able to do something. But in the other areas, you cannot see that because the CBN cannot be, even if they also tactically also have even been involved in trying to sort out the power sector, even if it's supposed to be the fiscal policy. So they've done so much trying to go into sectors because the fiscal side seems not to have an idea of what governance is all about, or bringing in policy that will complement what the monetary policies are doing. So if we continue like this, we continue to have those challenges. So it's not just the challenges of just having those monetary policy doing that, like you say, for the past 7 years. And you know, this administration has been here for 8 years, and we've seen the Nigerian economy nosedive to an all-time low because the physical side, as far as I'm concerned, has been non-existent.
Okay, so it's a good thing you mentioned the areas that the CBN sort of seems to have been dabbling into. Food inflation rose to 20.6% in June from 19.5% as a result of the increases in the prices of bread, wheat, cereal, fish, and oil. We know why that's happening. Do you think the MPC has really anything it can do to help Nigeria address this from its own basket of tricks and tools?
Well, we need to wait for them, but if you're looking at the crystal ball from here, you say they've done all they have to do. The only thing that I think they should do now is if they will be able to address the exchange rate volatility and come up with a magic word on how to stabilize that. If they can do that, then we will see those results. But if they cannot do that, sorry, I don't think there's a, because if you watch, even the MPC have been tactically not doing anything about the FX issue. Ever since they clamped down on the bureau de change, they've not created that window for those people that normally access this bureau de change to have a seamless access to FS like they normally do in the bureau de change. And this is not rocket science. I think it can be done. If it is done when people want to travel with PTE, I think it should also be done with people that want to do SME, small businesses. Make it a little bit not too cumbersome for them. We see that done in the PTA, whereby the CBN created a portal and people go there and within 12 days, 14 days before you're traveling, and you get your PTA. So I think they should complement that for those windows that the bureau de change used to achieve. I don't see any reason why bank cannot have a desk for bureau de change in their banking hall like it's done in every developed economic or in every developing economy. And with that, you'll be able to know how much you put in, how much you are earning, how much you are bringing in. Unfortunately, because of the subsidy issues, we've not been able to earn so much to defend the currency like we normally do. So definitely, we are seeing that gap between the parallel and the official getting wider and wider by the day, unless we address that area, which the monetary policy issues. I think that's the only challenge they have in their own side. But the physical side has to do their own in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of taxation, It's time for the physical side to begin to look at how you can reduce the tax burden. Even if it's on the civil servant, you can suspend tax for the civil servant now because of the high price in terms of food items. Yes. Trying to make sure that their earning capability are able to meet them. But this government, I keep saying, is not ready to take a bite in any of their revenue. And every government all over the world are beginning to take a bite in their revenue to be able to reduce the suffering of their people. But we are not seeing that in Nigeria. And that is why, because we don't have a government that was economically sound right from the day they came into the country.
So I ask you this final question, and I need a quick answer because of time. So the meeting starts today. We know the situation of not just Nigeria, but many across the continent. We've seen the protests because of it. And also, we don't really have a timeline as to when the Russia-Ukraine crisis will play out. Do you see the MPC raising the rates this month, keeping them the same, or by some form of miracle, maybe reducing them very quickly?
I don't think they will raise the rates. I think they will keep it. They will tell us what they will tell us. They always tell us that, look, for now, we will not be able to see the result in the short term, but they believe in the long term, they will see those results playing out. I think that's what they will tell us. I don't see them saying anything. I think rate will remain the same because rate hike has not improved the economy, neither will tightening be able to improve the economy. I think we'll see that remain the same, but the only out of the box thinking I'm waiting for them is to see how they can drive in more effect into the system and create that market for those people that are used to access the bureau de change. That will be a game changer.
All right, Muktar Mohammed, we have to end it there. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see what happens. The 286th meeting of the Nigerian Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria. There is more coming up on Business Edge. Do stick around so you can make sure you don't miss out. We'll be right back. To wrap things up, let's get us into NT for the Watch. These are a few stories we are tracking at this time. After the total investment of private insurance funds in Egypt increased to approximately 102 billion Egyptian pounds, Mohammed Omran, the chairman of the Financial Regulatory Authority, said that the authority aims to develop a special model for self-assessment of risk management for private insurance funds. In the first 4 months of 2022, remittances from Egyptians working abroad climbed by 7.70% year-on-year to almost $11.10 billion, up from over $10.30 billion. According to Hamran Gate, remittances totaled $3.10 billion in April alone, up 24.40% from the previous year's $2.50 billion. The High Court in Pretoria has ordered energy regulator NERSA to publish Eskom's 2023 to 2024 pricing application on or before the 1st of August and reach a decision by the 24th of December. This is happening in the midst of severe load shedding, which on June 28th, as a result of a labor unrest, escalated to stage 6 for the first time in many, many years. President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address South Africans on the urgent measures to deal with the power situation and add more energy to the system. And finally, Ethiopia's state-owned telecom provider Ethio Telecom said its mobile money service solution Telbir has garnered over 21 million subscribers. Ethio Telecom launched the Telbir mobile money service solution built by the Chinese tech giant Huawei back in May 2021. Telbir-based communications and transactions have reached 25.67 billion Ethiopian birr, about $490 million, integrating with 13 banks to transfer money from bank to the platform. And that's the business edge that we have for you, with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Download our mobile app, and of course also watch us where we stream live on numerous different platforms. Until next time, I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Do have a good one.